Are you getting angry at a TV show that you've watched and enjoyed for years? Is Game of Thrones a show that made you realize you don't control the entertainment you watch? Or are you still signing petitions to change the end of Lost? Let's see if we can all calm down on this reality-inducing bowl of dude soup.
This is going to be the last thing I do about this. This is it. I just wanted to make this video because I said I would. I just wanted my feelings and my viewpoints to be out there. I wanted to be set in stone, and I just want this to be over. It really is over for most people. I still felt compelled to make this video, and I hope it doesn't come off as like trying to start something or anything like that. I don't want this to be about hate. I don't want this to be about insulting people or anything like that or attacking anybody. But I do feel it's important to criticize the things that you love and to criticize the things you enjoy, just so you are never just complicit with the same mundane bullshit, I guess. So, let's just get into it. We're going to start off light. We're going to work our way up. I've got a few points here. I've got a few topics here. And we're really just going to go through it and work our way down to the controversy. So, to get started, I just want to clarify this is in regards to Dude Soup Podcast 227. And this is also going to be talking in response to Bruce Greenes, his live stream that he did and uploaded to his own YouTube channel. So, if you're not aware of what's going on, this video is not for you. It doesn't entirely get into it. You can probably figure it out as you go. I will be just touching on points, and I will have clips from each video that I'll be using to highlight points. So feel free to follow along, but it really is for people who were upset with the Dude Soup podcast and the Q&A response video. So first of all, let's just start with Bruce Greene apologizing, but not really apologizing.
Thank you for saying that. Like I said, I'm kind of down to answer any questions and all questions for this stream, because I think a lot of people thought that I was being condescending or arrogant, and I kind of wanted to make sure that no one felt that way, because I really wasn't. Obviously, I totally get it now. People are like, oh, well, you dismissed my opinion outright, blah, 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 blah. And I hear that, and I'm like, no, I didn't do that. But I want you to know that I hear that, and I'm sorry for you thinking that way. And a lot of people were saying it wasn't that you have a different opinion, it was the way you communicated it. And I've apologized for the fact that they took it the wrong way, because I genuinely did not feel condescending or arrogant about my opinion. But I'm sorry that it came off that way. And I don't want them to think that. I even felt stupid expressing my opinion. And so that's why, like, if it came off as condescending, I wish I knew why. I'm sorry that it did. Because instead I was like sort of worried about it.
So he says things like, I'm sorry you felt that way. I'm sorry you thought that. But these aren't apologies. What this really does is it puts the blame onto the person that you should be apologizing to. Because what you're telling them is that at best, you feel bad that they're upset because being upset is unpleasant. But really you're saying it's their own fault for being able to feel that way based on what you said. So it doesn't really come off as understanding of why that person is upset by what you said, or really you don't understand, what made that person upset, and it really comes off as empty. So this isn't an apology. You should always just apologize honestly and directly, and take ownership of whatever you did. You have to be genuine in your response, because otherwise people just aren't going to listen to you, and they're not going to accept that. It's just going to make them more upset, or it's just going to make them feel really bad, which is not what you want to do. You don't want to manipulate people into feeling bad about having feelings. So the next part that I just want to quickly touch on is him saying, you don't know me well enough to really form this opinion of me that you think that you know me, or you think that you understand me.
Clyde, it may be because you sub and watch me more often, so you know me. So I think if people maybe just tuned in, had no idea, maybe they thought that I was just shitting all over them. And, that's not what I wanted. That is definitely not what I wanted.
This really doesn't matter as a popular online personality. I'm sorry if that comes off as dismissive or rude, which is exactly what I'm trying to argue against. But it really is the case. It does not matter what you feel about yourself or what you think you know about yourself. All that matters is how people interpret it. So you have to really take that into account when you're speaking in public settings, such as on the podcast, or for me in this video. I know there's probably going to be something I say and I'm going to look like an idiot. That's just how it is. But I can't use the defense of, well, you don't know me well enough to understand. It's like, I shouldn't have to know you well enough to fully understand. I should try and make it clear what I'm saying and what I'm trying to say and how I'm trying to make you feel. That's just how it is. So this is just a quick point. The rest of this is going to be a little bit longer. So we have to talk about the toxic fan base. And this is kind of an argument that Bruce was using, and it's kind of a reality that is happening.
It's not really the backlash. It's more about having a bunch of people just insulting you personally. So like, it had nothing to do with my opinion. It was just basically shitting on my intelligence, calling me a cunt. Somebody who was subbed on Twitch just was like, I subbed him on Twitch and he's a cunt. Like, that was it. And it was like hundreds of people just name calling. Yeah, and Autumn did not have to come to my defense. She just did because she loves me. And she also got attacked. I know. What happened? What's with that? I don't get it. Why'd they do that to you?
Oh, I don't know.
I know. Well, Autumn is incredibly strong, so I wasn't worried about her. Still mean, though. I like to engage with people, but it got toxic pretty fast in the sense that people were just calling me names and saying, you were always shit anyways, etc., etc. Okay. I guess I sort of put my faith in the fact that maybe they'd watch more than 1 minute of the podcast. And the more that I looked at the comments, the more I realized people didn't do that. It's funny because I didn't think the Dude Soup title was aggressive. Alana and I actually talked about the Dude Soup title. We both kind of sat down and were like, oh, like, what should we title it? And we kind of went, we both were like, let's go with this. And neither of us really thought that it was something that would really anger people. I really didn't think so. I could tell that people thought it was just that I was dumb. Wow, aroused dentist. Howdy, Bruce. Yeah, I had a guy tell me to hang myself when I locked the thread the other day. Told me to stop sucking you and to grab a rope and stool. And ask them what they actually said. So when I come in and say, no, I didn't say that. I said this. That should be the end of it.
So I want to start off by saying that there really were people being assholes. And there were people being assholes everywhere. Whether it was YouTube, Reddit, Twitter, there were people being assholes. And I 100% will admit that there were people being assholes. Like, this is not a question. 100% there's people being assholes. But they were a really, really small minority of the people who were outraged. And I think this idea that there was a lot of people who were being offensive and being assholes is really misrepresenting the people who were upset. I don't think it's really fair. I think it pins fans against each other, and it's not fair. We'll get more into addressing the controversies later, but there really weren't that many comments that had vulgar insults or attacks on Bruce's character, and there weren't really any comments going against Autumn other than a few that I did see. The vast majority of these people criticizing the podcast were not being insulting or like being rude in their tone or choice of words. I've seen hundreds of comments at this point just from making my videos, and to say that there was overwhelming hate would be a huge misrepresentation of the fans, and the fans are really only trying to make you a better person, Bruce. I hope that you understand that. I think a big issue with this perception is that Bruce has been taking things as an insult when it's not really something that adds up to an insult. Any criticism that was light or in depth or whatever was responded to as if it was full of vitriol or hate, and when this just wasn't the case, it's really not fair for those who are airing their grievances just to lump them in with that. It is really hard to separate yourself from the content you create and to not try and defend yourself, especially when it seems like someone's attacking your character or misrepresenting you. Believe me, I get that. I understand that. After stuff I post online, it was like that. But it is something you have to do. You have to separate yourself. You have to step back from all these comments, and you can't respond to every single one. I will get more into that. But yeah, I definitely got absorbed into arguing with people as well when they were misrepresenting my criticisms and responses. As you can see, I made this entire video because people have been misrepresenting my responses and criticisms. It's hard not to be upset or respond to people when you put yourself out there and someone just dismisses your opinion or says something unequivocally false about you. In this Q&A video, Bruce echoed these feelings. He said it's one of the reasons why he felt the need to respond to so many people, so many of the negative comments. But we'll get more into that side of things later. Right now, I want to focus on this narrative of hundreds of people hating on Bruce. That's just not the case. Like I said before, it was a minority of people who are upset. And Bruce has been, smart enough to keep his tweets up. He didn't delete them. That would kind of be admitting defeat. But he's kept his tweets up. He's kept his posts up. So it makes it really easy to go back and read what's been said. At this point, it seems like most people are actually just sending him platitudes or grandstanding on his behalf. And that's just because the controversy is dying down. So it's really only the fans who didn't really get into it that they're like, oh, we love you, Bruce. We think you're great. Don't let the haters get to you and all that. So there are really, really, really small minority of people with the negative comments. I think part of the issue here is that Bruce has been focusing really hard on those negative comments, which is really affecting how he views valid criticisms he's been facing. On the topic of people being mean to Autumn for sticking up for Bruce, I think it's absurd that people were being mean to her. I think it only made sense for her to stand up for Bruce. I think her post wasn't really it wasn't tone deaf or anything. I don't think anyone should be attacking Autumn. I don't think anyone should even be speaking to Autumn about the situation. It really is really absurd to me. I don't condone any of that kind of behavior. So just from the bottom of my heart here, I apologize for anybody who's been rude. I don't want this video to cause anybody to be rude, so I don't want anybody going to anyone and saying anything that's rude. It's not about being rude. It is about addressing some things that were said. It's about addressing things and providing valid criticism. So there's no point in being rude. There's no point in attacking peripheral people to the situation. So now let's talk about Bruce's ideologies. We kind of touched on them earlier, but let's actually get into it now.
Generally, the way you want to change things is to not watch. So if you truly thought the show was bad and you don't want any more of it, then that's how you tell HBO you don't want it. You write to them and say, I canceled my HBO subscription because 6, 7, and 8, whatever, were so bad. Maybe I should back away. I don't know. Yeah, I can just go like, nope, said this, guys, and then leave. But again, I don't want to ignore people. I want them to know that we do watch our comments and our subreddit and all that other stuff. I want them to know that we're there and we want to talk with them. Wow. This last season was a PR nightmare. HBO is not a dumb company. Just follow the money doesn't work anymore for the most part. I hate to say it, but that is what happens. That's what happens. So that's why I was like, hey, if you don't want this anymore, don't watch it. What somebody wrote is subjective. It is not objective. It's interesting because if a lot of those people on subreddits or wherever don't like it, but then continue to talk about it, it's like it only gives it more power. Is it the artists who had a vision and made it, or the fans that keep it going? It's a combination of both. I think it was Bruce talking about The Flash and James talking about wrestling. Something can be enjoyable without being perfect, and if you go into something with a positive attitude, you're so much more likely to see the good. That is absolutely true.
In this video, Bruce really laid out his ideologies in full view for us. He really went in depth with who he is as a person, which I appreciate, as it's given me a more grounded idea of him. From various points throughout the video, we could see how he views the situation, how he thinks we as a fan base should handle the situation, referring to Game of Thrones. He says the best way to fix Game of Thrones is to stop watching. And that's usually when it's no longer enjoyable. You just stop watching, unsubscribe, whatever, cancel your HBO subscription. But, I think he's kind of like, he's allowed to say that. I agree with that. I think you should speak with your money, whatever. But, like, he's implying that things like the petition for the Game of Thrones, he thinks that those people are really actually trying to get the Game of Thrones final season to be remade, which it's not the case. People just wanted to voice their displeasure with the season. Like they didn't want to actually be remade. They just wanted to show like, hey, look, we're upset with how this turned out. So can you just like acknowledge that at least? And you know, they can sign the petition and cancel the HBO subscription. That's not a mutually exclusive thing. They can just do both, and I think that's a completely valid way to express yourself. Try not to be rude about it, but like, hey, you're allowed to say, you know, I didn't like this. I am just going to represent that by saying, I think it should be remade. I don't expect it to be remade. But yeah, of course, Bruce is right. Speak with your money. I agree with that to a certain extent. But we'll get into why the way he said it is the problem. Another thing we learned from Bruce in this video is that he really wants to be able to have a discussion with all his viewers. That's why he tries to respond to everyone online, even the negative people. In his mind, he wants to respect everyone by engaging them, which is a really... I can see where he comes from with that, even though it doesn't really work out. Other creators don't interact nearly as often or as in-depth as Bruce, and I think anyone can see that. They go on his profiles. He doesn't agree with this. He thinks you should interact more. But he feels the best way to respect an audience is by interacting with them. I can understand his reasoning. I just don't think it's a healthy direction to go. You really do need to step away sometimes and just let it sit. When this Q&A addresses all the issues at once, is a much better response than any individual comment ever could. So that's just why it's important to say, hey, you know what? I'm just going to wait. I'm going to see what people have to say. I'm going to make this one response video. It's going to cover all the points, and then we can go from there. One of the main points of the original Dude Sue podcast, and something he brings up again in this Q&A video, is that art cannot be evaluated objectively. Bruce is very firm on this, and he keeps saying that, you know, it's subjective, it's subjective, it's subjective. And while this is true for pretty much everything in the world, well, I guess in some, you know, philosophy courses, that would actually just be the case. Like everything ever, including your perception of reality, is subjective, which... when you're discussing a TV show, that's not a useful viewpoint to have because it just doesn't lead to any meaningful conversation. It doesn't mean to any meaningful discussion. And I think it's a little bit disingenuous to think that to say that and like expect us to actually think you think that, because you really can objectively look at from a certain frame of reference. Like you have to close your scope in on what you're talking about. And in terms of the art industry, especially movies and stuff, there are set in stone things that you can criticize objectively in that context. I know like nothing can be objective. I get that. But objectively, you can criticize movies and TV shows and everything like that, because you have to be able to at least say something like and base it off something that everyone else agrees off. So like, I think the pacing was bad. That is something that is a quality of writing that is important to look at objectively when having a discussion like this, because you know, it is a very important part of the show itself. If a show is going too slow or it's going too fast, you're going to lose people, or people aren't going to enjoy it as much. And while your interpretation of the writing is subjective, the quality of the writing is something that if a majority of people are on the same page, they can agree that it was bad. And I think that is what shows when something is objective in terms of art. Obviously, everything is subjective. It all comes down to your personal tastes and opinions and perceptions. But when discussing it in like an academic sense or in a debate sense or in just a discussion format, like what was on the podcast, you have to be able to agree that some things are objectively viewable. So I'm just going to move on past that because I kind of went off my script there. But I guess just to really put that into a concise point before I move on, it's important to be on the same playing field when discussing anything. And that's just how it is. That is just the situation as it is. Like, if you're not on the same playing field, you'll never have a good conversation. It'll always be just a mess of going in circles. So there's actually some part in his Q&A video that I do agree on, that he says. He mentions a comment from one of his viewers on Twitch, that you can enjoy something bad or something not great, if you just go into it with a positive outlook, like if you're not expecting the best thing in the world and you're actually going in like, I'm gonna find the good in this, or if you just go in like something like The Room, you're like, it's bad, but it's so bad it's good, you can enjoy it. That is completely enjoyable. It can redeem a piece of art, and I 100% agree. That is 100% valid. I even did that with Game of Thrones to a certain extent, for the last season at least. I just tried to enjoy it when it was fun. But I still criticized it when it got bad, like when the pacing was off, or the writing was too cheesy. I was still criticizing it, but like the fight scenes, the destruction of King's Landing, like all that stuff was really fun. It was really well done. I actually like a lot of the plot points individually, but it was actually bringing them together and the pacing that really ruined it for me. But anyways, that's beside the point. The Game of Thrones is not the main point. So yeah, just here's to finding common ground. The final thing I just want to talk about in terms of Bruce's ideologies is that Bruce wants to be able to dispel misunderstandings and mischaracterizations about himself right away. He doesn't want those to sit out there. So he wants to get in and he just wants to say, hey, no, I didn't say that, or I didn't mean to say that, or I didn't mean that, and I just want to clarify this. He wants to be in there and he's doing it, but he's doing it on an individual comment-to-comment basis. So this applies to things like when on YouTube, there was a lot of people saying Bruce is being arrogant, including myself. I was saying he was acting arrogant, or what he said was arrogant. I was trying to make the difference between what his saying is being arrogant. I'm not saying he's an arrogant person, because calling him an arrogant person would imply he's being arrogant all the time. I just think in this case he was being arrogant. It's completely possible to be hypocritical sometimes while not being a hypocrite for your whole life. As a person, that doesn't have to define you. You're allowed to be a complex human. So as we discussed earlier, it's not really for him to decide whether or not he's being arrogant, or whether or not he was coming off condescending or whatever. It's not his place to decide how people view him. And I get it, he really believes that he was not being condescending or arrogant. He is himself after all, but it doesn't change the fact that people interpreted it that way, and he needs to clarify himself to them, and he needs to apologize properly. And as we discussed, he hasn't yet apologized properly. Okay, so we discussed the way Bruce thinks. We've discussed some other points there, just about the toxicity in the fan base. We don't really know Bruce as a person, but now that we do, we can actually discuss the controversies. So this is where we finally get to point.
Hey, Bruce, do you think maybe the video title could have set people off a bit? Yes, I do. That's sort of the point of those video titles, is to put forth an opinion that gets people to watch. We do that all the time with Inside Gaming. We do that all the time with Dude Soup. I truthfully, for me, I totally believed in that statement, because I was like, hey, your outrage is ridiculous, because generally there's a pretty small portion of people that are upset about it, but they're really, really upset about it, and they're looking for anything to talk about that issue, which is fine. Also, that's another thing. I'm sort of in a unique position because AT&T just bought HBO, so I kind of have a pretty good idea of the way HBO will go. Maybe I have an inkling, so that's why I was like, hey, if you don't want this anymore, don't watch it. Generally, the way you want to change things is to not watch. This was something that I sort of asked out loud on Twitter. And why not just stop watching the show if it's so bad? People complained about it a lot, and I was always like, but why go through this? Why push yourselves through another whole season, another 2 years? And it was because people were saying, oh, well, my opinion is this. And I wanted to make sure that, again, my opinion was heard as well. This wasn't just an echo chamber of people being like, I didn't like it. I wanted to make sure people heard me say it was okay, but never did I ever stop them from talking because I said that.
Why get me invested? Like the whole, Arya going literally across the sea and learning to become a masterclass assassin who can turn herself into anyone. She uses that skill once and then is like, I guess I've used it enough. And it's like, it could have been useful at many different times in the last 2 episodes. And I felt like that would have been a nice payoff for her character. But she didn't really use that. I mean, like there's 100 things.
She did kill the Night King.
Yeah, but she didn't use her assassin ability to use that.
I read into that scene and said that she did.
Traveling from Winterfell to King's Landing, and now it feels like people are traveling back and forth.
Yeah, and
Love it.
in the space of a single episode.
Yeah.
I love
See,
it.
you like that,
I'm
but
able to easily evade them, no problem. That's what I got from it.
right.
So
Well, you can, yeah, you can. We can.
Sure,
That's,
yeah,
that's the
yeah.
confusing thing. Though, is like anyone that watches the season, like it feels rushed. Like I don't think there's anyone that I've talked to that hasn't felt that way, even if you liked it.
I didn't feel that way.
Okay. Well,
I mean,
I guess I sort of put my faith in the fact that maybe they'd watch more than 1 minute of the podcast. And the more that I looked at the comments, the more I realized people didn't do that.
Right from the beginning of the podcast, Bruce goes through his little opening sequence. The title of the podcast is "Your Outrage is Ridiculous," and which Bruce acknowledges that it wasn't probably the best choice because he really wanted people to really listen to what he had to say, but that kind of put them off. But he's otherwise defended that choice. Like he's kind of said it both ways at this point. That it was kind of a bad choice, but at the same time he thought it was a great choice, and other people thought it was a great choice. So it's just an interesting flip-flop there. It's clear that the title gave a lot of people a negative bias, which I do agree with him because Bruce even said that going into the podcast, which certainly influenced how they perceive some of the things that were said. For me, I didn't mind the title. I actually thought it was fine. I was still going to watch the video. I just assumed there'd be a lot of banter about it, like the petition, like, oh yeah, it's funny, people are kind of crazy for signing that petition. Do they really think that they're gonna I was thought that. So the title actually didn't put me off. I just put the podcast on in the background and I started doing other stuff. But it was about 20-30 minutes in that something like piqued my interest. I forget what it was originally now, but I think it was just a tonal shift. But I started paying more closer attention, and that's when I started getting frustrated. And I ended up watching the whole podcast. I wanted to see where it goes. I didn't want to be misinformed, but I wanted somebody to speak up. I didn't really get there, so that's when I went on Twitter, and I just expressed myself. I was like, I didn't really like this. I didn't really like where podcasts went. So yeah. I just want to clarify, I did watch the whole video. I just said that, but I just want to clarify. I did actually watch the whole video. I've watched the whole podcast. I've watched the whole stream that Bruce did. So Bruce mentioned that he went back and seeing how he acted in the podcast, and he still doesn't see anything wrong other than that he wasn't able to get his point across properly. I think that one of the problems is that he doesn't see the issue. I think that he should really understand, like, when he goes back, he should be able to see what went wrong there, because, anybody who's, like, self-aware or self-conscious, when, like, I'm going to look back on this video that I'm making right now, and I'm going to be like, oh, why did I say that, or why did I leave that in, or whatever. There's going to be stuff like that forever. And the fact that he looks back, he doesn't see anything wrong with it, it really comes off as, like, he's not owning up to anything. He's kind of dismissing people's views of him. I know he tries really hard not to, but it really just still comes off that way. And it's really weird that he doesn't see a problem with the issue of him interjecting with things like, oh, I liked it, I loved it, or I didn't feel that way. Especially when someone's in the middle of talking, or they're not really done their point, even if there's a light pause in what they're saying. It comes off as dismissive and defensive at the same time. Which is not a good combination, and it can really influence how people perceive you and approach going against your viewpoint. By interjecting and setting unfair ground rules, Bruce is actually influencing the other hosts to work within a framework that requires them to restructure all of their points around Bruce's ideologies, like saying things are subjective, or saying like, oh, I liked it, or this and that. It really puts other people on the defensive by you being defensive, because now they're trying to work with you to have this discussion. They're trying to work around you to have this discussion, and the things that you're saying aren't really allowing for that to happen. Some other things that pulled the rug out from underneath the other hosts was his insistence that objectivity doesn't exist. When it comes to art, and that he made this claim that the ratings are all that matter to HBO, and I get that, and just to clarify, the ratings refer to viewership, not reviews, not the critical reviews, at least. But yeah, the fact that he keeps bringing that up kind of seems really dismissive. I think that really put people on a different path to where they would have gone with the show, or the podcast, I mean. I understand why he said it. It just doesn't allow for a meaningful conversation. So I wish you really hadn't brought that up, or at least presented it in a different way, so that it would have been more acceptable and wouldn't have hurt people's how people were going to go about discussing it. Speaking of meaningful conversation, this also brings up the point that Bruce mentioned, that he thinks most people didn't finish the video. As we've already discussed before, this is false. I've watched the whole video. A lot of people watched the whole video. I can prove that most people actually did watch at least past the beginning of the video, because really the criticisms that I have and a lot of people have didn't show up until at least the 20-minute mark, or it may have been earlier, but it also is like 20 minutes on. It's like there's a lot of stuff that just kind of gets under people's skin. There's not a lot of stuff that I'm going to use in this video because it's like really subtle and it's like not really a big deal, but I have a few big ones that are in there, and they are from like the 20-minute mark all the way up to like the 50-minute mark. So it doesn't stop. It just keeps going. So it's not really fair. It kind of dismisses the argument without fully getting into it, because it's like, oh, well, you didn't even watch the whole video. If you just watched the whole video, I addressed that. It's like, no, we did watch the whole video and you didn't really address it, even though you think that you did. And I understand that you think that you did, and you're allowed to think that, but we didn't think that. So you're not really appeasing us as the viewers, which, you know, you can take that for what you will. I just think it's important for you to appease your viewers. You don't have to admit defeat. You just have to genuinely apologize to them and like clarify yourself. It's okay to apologize even if you don't feel like you needed to. Just apologize and then say your two bits. Like, I'm sorry that I said that. I shouldn't have said that. But this is actually what I meant to say. This is what I wanted to say, and I hope that you can understand that. We can have a discussion about that. That's completely fine. But that didn't happen. So with regards to his solution to the whole bad TV thing, I do agree with the best way to show HBO that you aren't satisfied is to cancel your subscription. I agree with that to a certain extent. I get it. I feel it. And I do just want to say, like, it is a little bit different. You know, you can not like Game of Thrones but like other shows, so doesn't make sense to cancel HBO over just one show. But the gist of it, I do understand. The problem with what he's saying, though, is not actually the content. It is the way that he's saying it. He says it really matter-of-factually, and he says it kind of, and this is where it comes in. He says it kind of condescendingly. Like, I know better. You should just listen to me. I'm trying to help you. Why don't you just listen to me? Like, that's, like, I get that, but, like, it really does not come off well. It really throws people off. It really makes them feel like you're invalidating their viewpoint. So you really can't. You had to be careful with your tone. You had to be careful with the choice of words that you use to get to a point, because you don't want people to interpret you wrong, which obviously happened. And I think you can have an opinion about how things are done, but you can't say it like it's a fact. Like, I get it, you think it's a fact, and it really does seem that way, like money really decides things, but saying it as a fact is really putting people off, and that's why people seeing you as arrogant and condescending, is because you keep saying it like, this is how you do it, like, why don't you just listen to me, and you kind of laugh it off. And then, like, the whole thing about ratings, you know, he says, like, if you keep talking about it on r/freefolk or on YouTube or whatever, making videos about it, it's keeping the ratings up. It's showing a discussion is alive and that people want more. And that if you didn't want more, or you didn't like it, or you want them to change, that you should just do what he says and, like, cancel and stop talking about it. But that's not fair. Like, you can't just tell people, oh, well, you by talking about it is actually making it worse. It's like, no, that people are allowed to complain. People are allowed to discuss the show, even if they didn't like it. Like, just because some HBO executive is going to be like, well, look, millions of people are talking about it, I guess we'll have to make more. That is so beyond your control. That is so out of your scope, like, you as a viewer. And this sort of thing just really derails the conversation. It makes people feel invalidated for having feelings, especially when it's about something that they used to like and now it's gone bad. It's definitely not a good way to approach the situation. And I mean, at least it's not good to approach it the way that was handled in the podcast. Now let's get into the times that Bruce was, like, kind of interjecting his viewpoint when other people were talking. I think this really kind of subtly changed the ways that they're going. Like, as I said before, it sort of puts people on the defensive. It changes the way that they'll approach their arguments that they're going to make or the criticisms that they're going to make. And it's really not necessary to interject in this kind of conversation with a contrary viewpoint, at least not until everyone's done giving their piece. Like, if someone's in the middle talking or someone is going on a point or a tangent, you shouldn't just interrupt them just to give your differing opinion. That's not fair. It kind of destroys someone's train of thought. It can destroy where they're going with the point. And it makes people not even want to speak up anymore, because they're like, well, it doesn't matter what I say because I know how you feel already. So it's best just not to do that. It is really rude, actually. But, sometimes you just, in the heat of the moment, you don't realize it. So just don't do it. Besides, Bruce was the host of the podcast. I think people kind of forgot about that. Like, Bruce was hosting that podcast. He had his laptop with all the points he wanted to discuss. Like, he had his timeline of things. So he was in control the entire time. He can bring up the alternative points the entire time. That's the whole point of the podcast. And part of it really came off defensive, and it came off as grandstanding. There's a few times, I've got clips here, you're going to see them. There's a few times where it's just like, it is kind of cringy too. Like, he's clearly grandstanding, it looks like he's grandstanding. I know he keeps saying he doesn't want to come off that way. He never intended it. But, like, saying things like, well, I didn't feel that way, and then shrugging and, like, giving that look on his face. That's one, that's cringy. And two, that is putting yourself in, like, a vulnerable place. It's going to make people feel sympathetic to you. That is essentially, and that's essentially what grandstanding is like trying to get a favorable reaction from people. So just don't do that. Like, please, just let the conversation go where it's going, and chime in when it's appropriate. And there was a point that got brought up towards the end in the Q&A session itself, and he was talking about how there's this idea that fans feel entitled. I think this actually was touched on the Dude Soup podcast as well. But anyways, he feels that fans are entitled with media now, and that complaining and demanding changes is bad for the industry. I think it can be to some extent. I'm sure there's times when the complaints and then the changes, you're like, why did you do that? But I really think it actually is a good thing that companies will listen. Sometimes I think there should be more companies and production companies that should listen to the fans, especially in the gaming industry. That's a big one. Like, we have all these pre-orders and microtransactions, and companies are just releasing games that are not finished, and they're just throwing them out there, and then fans are just stuck with it. If they enjoy it, they'll buy it, but then, like, they get sucked into microtransactions, or they get sucked into a game that just wasn't finished, and now they're just finishing it after the fact. I think if more companies are willing to delay their shows, like in the case of Sonic, I think that it would actually be really good for the industry. So I actually don't agree with this point at all. Also, like, Bruce uses Sonic movie and Mass Effect 3 as examples. And this is actually in the podcast. I can remember they had a discussion about it briefly, about Mass Effect 3 at least. And I don't think it actually sets a bad precedent, but those things didn't have the impact that you think. There's no way, especially, that the Sonic movie and its changes affected the petition. That the timing is not there for it. It hasn't had a cultural impact yet. Like, I think you see it because you're in both of those spheres, the Game of Thrones sphere and the Sonic sphere, just because of your position as, like, a host online for gaming content and movie content. But it really is not that connected for most people, especially not the general public, which for Game of Thrones, a lot of those fans are the general public. It is not this specific niche culture. It is millions of fans. And saying that the Sonic or Mass Effect or whatever set a precedent that is now already having an effect on how we consume media, I think that's a little bit absurd. But yeah, people were just upset. They just wanted to voice their opinion. It's not that deep. It's not a precedent being set. It's just people who are upset. And that's everything. That's the controversy. So let's get into Bruce's actual apology. And this is actually an apology that he did well.
I really appreciate you guys coming on and talking with me about all of this. It's something I wanted to make sure that people were not, like, even if they had any complaints, and I'm glad a lot of people put in their different opinions and complaints into the chat, because I wanted to read them and address them directly rather than in an hour-long podcast with 3 other people, because that can be tough. That's why I like to do this stuff, is because I get to talk to you guys directly about this. And so I'm sorry that if I came off as arrogant or condescending or whatever in those podcasts. I never meant to, didn't ever feel that way. And yeah, and I absolutely apologize that it came off that way, because I didn't want it to. That's for sure.
It was actually at the end of the Q&A, so it's 2 hours and 15 minutes into his Q&A video. But it is a good apology, and I appreciated the apology. I was actually really happy to see it. I'm sad that it was at the end, and I'm sad that we had to go through all these fake apologies to get to the actual apology. So it kind of is ruined by those previous apologies. I wish he kind of just made a video just showing this one apology, and that was it, and that'd be the end of it. But let's just discuss it. So he actually says, like, I apologize. I didn't, like, he still says some of the same points, but he says it in a better way. Like, I apologize for what I said. I didn't want it to come off that way. I didn't mean for it to come off that way. So I really apologize that it did come off that way. That's the important part, is he's acknowledging that it did come off that way, and he's apologizing for that. And I think when you put that into the context of this Q&A, you can see he's genuinely trying to get people to see his perspective, and he's really trying to alleviate some of the tension that happened. And I know it really alleviated a lot of tension for me, but it really devolved too far before he got this apology out. And I think if he would just led with this apology, it probably would have been a lot better. And I think this brings up another point in the Q&A video about one of his fans on Twitch says, hey, take a look at PewDiePie. He's really good at handling controversy, and he's really good at making good PR for himself in terms of handling controversy. And I know, poor Bruce. Like, I'm just kind of ragging on him, but Bruce dismisses that. He's like, oh, PewDiePie caused adpocalypse. Is he good at handling controversy? Is he good at PR? And I think, Bruce, you really should look into it. I think that person was really just trying to help you, because this is back to the topic of stepping away and just making one concise response. Really, that's what you got to do. You got to step away, make one concise response. And PewDiePie has some great videos recently, like James Trials, where he actually pretty much gives a tutorial on how to make a good apology video. And I'll just go over the key points here. You got to be genuine. You have to genuinely apologize. You have to be honest with your fans. You have to actually apologize. Like, you have to just straight up apologize for whatever you did. You just have to take the L on that and just say, I am so sorry. And you can still go into clarifying, like, this is what I wanted to say. I wish I could have said that better. I'm really sorry about what I did end up saying, and I just hope we can move on from this. And it only has to be like 5 minutes. 5 minutes at most. Like, it really does not have to be a long video. Just get through the points, be genuine, be honest, and be done with it. That's it. So just take a look at that. Don't dismiss PewDiePie. PewDiePie is really honest and great creator. He's really genuine. He has his flaws, as everyone does, but he is really good at this. So I think you should take a look at that. Also, this is my last thing. Then it's over. Then we're done. At the end of the video, they're talking about the white horse in King's Landing. This is in the Dude Soup. And they're like, what? Like, what happened with that? What was that? And Bruce says, do you guys really need that to be explained? Come on.
White horse
Boycott
shit.
it. Don't watch it.
I want.
Oh yeah,
I don't think I'll watch
the
any
white
of the
horse. Can we talk about the white horse? Even you gotta say, what's up with that horse, man?
I don't know. Just they found a horse.
And then
She's
what happened
riding
to
out of the
horse?
city, and then the next
And
time
then
we see
she's
her
just
in the
back
next
in the city and the
episode,
horse
she's
is
just
gone.
walking the opposite direction. Where'd the horse go?
Do you really need the horse?
It was like a
to
15-minute
be
shot of a
explained to you?
horse.
Are you joking?
It was a very long shot.
Guys,
That's all
are you
that was.
really joking? She got off the horse and tied it somewhere.
Why?
What do you
It was
mean,
also
why?
Jamie's horse, by the way.
And I think that actually got a little too serious, so kind of cast some doubt on some of everything I've said so far. I really don't want it to. I think I just want to accept the apology and move on. But I just want to put that in there just so we can kind of have that inkling of like, okay, was he really being misrepresented and misinterpreted? Was he really trying to say all this other stuff? Because it really, that kind of throws me off. It kind of makes me think like, he was actually really invested in this and he was really trying to defend it instead of having a discussion. So I just want to say, like, don't do this. Like, just from now on, just try to take it a little bit less serious. You don't have to defend your viewpoint as much. You just have to have discussion. That's all people want to see is a discussion. You want some back and forth, like, oh, well, I think this. Well, I think this. I'm not invalidating you, but I just want to look at it this way. That's all people want. You know, people talk about when Lawrence is hosting the Dude Soup. You know, there is a lot of that. There's a lot of discussion, and it was really noticeable difference in this one. So just try to avoid taking it a little too serious, and just try to be conscious of how you're affecting other people and how they're able to present their opinions. Yeah, that's it. That's pretty much everything. After this, I just want it to be over. I'm done. This is done. Like, this is it. I'm not doing any more stuff about this. I really don't want this to be a hateful thing. As you can see, I try to be really respectful during this whole thing. So with that, I'm just going to put an end to this. It's over. This video encompasses everything. If you have any issues with it, just feel free to let me know and I can take a look at it. But I think, I really hope at least that this really comes off well, and it really helps set the record straight of what happened, why people were upset. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.